Cregan Stark is one of those characters in Westeros who becomes more impressive the deeper you go into his story. Most people know him because of the Dance of the Dragons and especially the Hour of the Wolf, but Cregan's story actually starts much earlier, and it continues for decades after the dance. Cregan was born in 108 AC as the eldest son of Rickon Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, and Lady Gillian Glover. He also had a younger brother who died in 119 AC, and according to Mushroom, a bastard half-sister named Sarah Snow. I'll come back to Sarah later, because this is one of those stories we probably shouldn't take as absolute fact. When Rickon Stark died in 121 AC, Cregan became Lord of Winterfell at just 13 years old. Since he was too young to rule, his uncle Bernard Stark became regent. But when Cregan came of age at 16 in 124 AC, Bernard wasn't exactly eager to give up power. Their relationship became tense, and by 126 AC, Cregan had Bernard and his 3 sons imprisoned and took control of the North himself. Honestly, that tells you a lot about Cregan. He was young, but he clearly wasn't someone people could push around. Cregan later married Lady Ara Norrie, a childhood friend, but she died in 128 AC while giving birth to their son Rickon, whom Cregan named after his own father. Then the Dance of the Dragons began. For more than a century after Aegon's conquest, House Stark had mostly stayed away from royal politics. But when King Viserys I died, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon travelled north to secure support for Rhaenyra. After visiting the Eyrie, Sisterton and White Harbour, Jacaerys arrived at Winterfell and met Cregan. According to Grand Maester Muncan, the two got along extremely well, with Jacaerys reminding Cregan of his late younger brother. They drank together, hunted together, trained together, and eventually swore an oath of brotherhood. I really like this part of Cregan's story because, at least according to Muncan, this wasn't just a political alliance. There seems to have been a genuine friendship between them. But we also have other accounts. Septon Eustace claimed Jacaerys spent his time trying to convert Cregan from the old gods to the faith of the Seven. And then there's Mushroom, who claimed that Cregan's half-sister Sarah Snow slept with Jacaerys. According to Mushroom, Cregan was furious until he learned that the two had secretly married in the God's Wood at Winterfell. Now, I wouldn't treat that as confirmed history. Archmaester Gildane himself is skeptical of Mushroom's more scandalous stories. What we do know is that Cregan and Jacaerys reached an agreement known as the Pact of Ice and Fire. Cregan pledged his support to Rhaenyra, and the future firstborn daughter of Jacaerys would eventually marry Cregan's son Rickon. Quick interruption, if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to subscribe, because we're just about to get to the moment that changes everything. Now let's continue. And Cregan kept his word. Roderick Dustin, Lord of Barraton, led the first northern host south. These were the famous Winter Wolves, older Northmen who knew a long winter was coming and were willing to fight even if they never made it home. They helped the Blacks win several battles in the Riverlands before being destroyed at the First Battle of Tumbleton. Desmond Manderley also sent troops from White Harbour, led by his son Sir Medric and Sir Torren Manderley. But the war eventually turned against Rhaenyra. Jacaerys was killed at the Battle of the Gullet, Rhaenyra lost King's Landing after the storming of the Dragon Pit, and she was eventually killed on Dragonstone. Cregan still honoured his promise. In 130 AC, he sent word that he would raise 10,000 Northmen for Rhaenyra, although he needed to wait until the final harvest was brought in before marching south. Even after Rhaenyra was dead and Aegon II had returned to power, Cregan still marched. In 131 AC, Cregan brought his second northern host south. The exact number is disputed. Eustace claimed he had 20,000 men, while Muncan believed there were around 8,000. And this is where Cregan Stark became a legend. By the time he reached King's Landing, Aegon II had already been poisoned. Cregan was furious, not because he supported Aegon, but because he believed a king should not be murdered with poison instead of facing the consequences of war. He wanted justice. Cregan entered the Red Keep and held court for 6 days. This became known as the Hour of the Wolf. He imprisoned several people connected to Aegon II's death and was named Hand of the King by the young Aegon III so he could administer justice. Cregan condemned Grand Maester Orwyle, Sir Giles Belgrave, Larys Strong, Corlys Velaryon and several others. But Baela and Rhaenyra convinced Aegon III to spare Corlys, and Cregan eventually accepted the king's decision. Mushroom gives us another version claiming Alazan Blackwood, also known as Black Ailey, helped save Corlys and that Cregan became impressed with her during their time in King's Landing. Again, that part comes from Mushroom, so I'd take it with a grain of salt. What we do know is that Cregan later married Alazan Blackwood. Before leaving King's Landing, Cregan personally executed Sir Giles Belgrave and Larys Strong with ice, the ancestral Valyrian steel greatsword of House Stark, and the very next day, he resigned as Hand. That's honestly one of my favorite things about Cregan. He came south because he gave his word, demanded justice, did what he believed needed to be done, and then simply went home. He even refused an offer to remain as one of Aegon III's regents. Cregan returned to Winterfell in 132 AC, and his story still wasn't over. In 133 AC, the North was devastated by famine and the winter fever. Taking advantage of the North's weakness, a wildling chieftain named Silas the Grim led around 3,000 men south of the wall and raided the Gift. Cregan personally rode out from Winterfell and gathered whatever forces were available, including Glovers, Flints, Norries, and 100 Night's Watch Rangers. His force eventually hunted down and destroyed Silas's raiders. And this is another reason I admire Cregan. He wasn't just a warrior who became famous because of the dance. He continued defending the North for decades afterward. He also once fought Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight, who reportedly praised Cregan as one of the finest swordsmen he had ever faced. Cregan lived a remarkably long life. He was still alive in 157 AC when his son and heir Rickon died at Sunspear during Daeron I Targaryen's conquest of Dorne. Rickon left behind two daughters, Sansa and Serena, but the succession after Cregan became extremely complicated. Cregan's younger sons eventually inherited Winterfell. Jota Stark became Lord of Winterfell and married his half-niece Sansa. After him came Cregan Stark, despite the competing claims of Edric Stark and Serena's descendants. When Cregan later died childless during the Scagosi Rebellion, Cregan's fifth and final son, Brandon Stark, inherited Winterfell. The later generations of House Stark descended from him. So when we talk about Cregan Stark, we shouldn't just think about the 6 days he spent in King's Landing. He ruled the North for decades. He survived family conflicts, the Dance of the Dragons, famine, disease, wildling invasions, and a remarkably complicated succession. And honestly, that makes him even more fascinating to me. Cregan Stark became legendary because he kept his word, defended his people, and never seemed particularly interested in the political games of the South. He came to King's Landing, did what he believed was right, and then went back north. That's why the Old Man in the North feels like such a fitting nickname. Cregan Stark was already a legend during the Dance of the Dragons, but the really interesting part is that his story continued long after the war was over. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing is one of the best ways to support me and help me make more A Song of Ice and Fire videos. Don't forget to let me know in the comments which character you want me to cover next. See you in the next one.